The council chamber stretched across 5 kilometers of polished black stone. 783 alien species sat in curved rows that rose toward a ceiling made of captured starlight. This was the heart of galactic civilization. This was where empires were born and destroyed with a single vote. And today, this was where humanity would face judgment. High Arbiter Marth floated at the center of the chamber. His body was a mass of silver tentacles wrapped around a core of pure energy. He had governed the council for 9,000 years. He had watched civilizations rise and fall. He had ordered the extinction of 17 species who had threatened galactic stability. And now, he was preparing to add an 18th. Bring forward the human representatives. His voice echoed through neural translators in every mind present. The massive doors at the chamber's base slid open. 3 humans walked in. They were small compared to most species present. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no visible defenses. The delegates from the warrior species laughed quietly. The humans looked like prey walking into a den of predators. Ambassador David Cole walked at the front. He was 62 years old, with gray hair and calm blue eyes. Behind him walked Commander Elise Vance, head of Earth's military intelligence, and Dr. Marcus Webb, humanity's foremost expert on alien psychology. They wore simple dark suits. No medals, no weapons. Nothing to suggest they understood the danger they faced. You stand accused, Morath announced, of Class 7 violations against galactic law. Your species has developed forbidden technology. Your ships have entered restricted space. Your scientists have asked questions that threaten the stability of our civilization. How do you answer these charges? David Cole looked around the chamber. Hundreds of alien faces stared back at him. Some showed hatred. Some showed fear. A few showed curiosity. He had studied every species here. He knew their histories, their weaknesses, their secrets. Knowledge was the only weapon humans had ever truly needed. We answer, he said quietly, with a question of our own. The chamber fell silent. No species had ever responded to charges with a question. The protocol demanded submission, explanation, or defiance. Questions were not part of the procedure. You do not have the right to ask questions, Morath replied. You are here to answer for your crimes. And yet questions are why we are here. David took a step forward. 9 months ago, your council sent a diplomatic vessel to Earth. They told us we had been accepted into galactic civilization. They told us we would be given technology, trade routes, and protection. They told us we were welcome. That offer was withdrawn when we discovered your violations. No, that offer was a test. And we failed it in a way you did not expect. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Ambassador Kell of the Vorthian Empire leaned forward, her reptilian eyes narrowing. She had voted in favor of the test. She had been certain the humans would accept the offer and become dependent on council technology like every other young species. Instead, they had done something unprecedented. Your integration team spent 6 months on Earth, David continued. They offered us faster-than-light engines, medical technology that could extend our lives by centuries, and energy systems that would solve every resource problem our species has ever faced. And we refused. We refused every single gift. The murmurs became shouts. Several delegates rose from their seats, demanding explanations. No species had ever refused integration gifts. The gifts were designed to be irresistible. They created dependency. They ensured control. They were the foundation of council power. Why? Morath demanded. Why would you refuse what every species desires? David smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had seen through a very old lie. Because we found the strings attached. Your integration gifts are not gifts at all. They are chains. Every species that accepts them becomes dependent on Council supply lines, Council maintenance, Council approval. Within 3 generations, they forget how to develop technology on their own. Within 5 generations, they cannot survive without your support. And within 10 generations, they are exactly what you want them to be. Obedient, controlled, harmless. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates screamed accusations at each other and at the humans. Some demanded immediate execution. Others demanded proof. A few sat in stunned silence, realizing that the small creatures from the 3rd planet of an insignificant sun had done what no other species had ever done. They had understood the game. High Arbiter Moroth raised his tentacles, projecting a wave of mental energy that silenced the chamber. His silver form had darkened to near black, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. These are dangerous accusations, Ambassador. If you cannot prove them, you will be executed for slander against the Council itself. I can prove them. David reached into his jacket and withdrew a small data crystal. This contains the private communications of your integration team. It contains their true mission parameters. It contains instructions from this very Council explaining how to ensure humanity's permanent dependence. And it contains something else. Something that I think the delegates here will find very interesting. He held up the crystal. This contains a list of every species the Council has secretly manipulated over the past 12,000 years. Every civilization that was offered integration and then slowly strangled into submission. Every world that was stripped of its potential and turned into a servant state. Every lie your founders told to build this empire of dependency. Moroth moved forward, his energy core pulsing with barely contained fury. Where did you obtain that information? From your own archives. You assumed we could not access them because we lacked the technology. You were wrong. We lacked your technology, but we had our own. We have been developing in secret for 40 years, hidden from your observation networks, advancing in ways you never predicted. You thought we were a young species making rapid progress. You were half right. We are making rapid progress. But we are not young. Commander Vance stepped forward, activating a holographic display from a device on her wrist. An image appeared in the chamber center, showing Earth from orbit. But this was not modern Earth. This was Earth from millions of years ago. Humanity did not evolve naturally, she said. We discovered this 30 years ago. Our species was seeded on Earth by an older civilization. They left us instructions, buried deep in our genetic code, warning us about the Council, warning us about the trap that awaited any species that reached the stars. The image shifted, showing ancient structures hidden beneath Earth's surface. Machines that had been dormant for millions of years, waiting for humanity to find them. We woke up the sleepers, Vance continued. We learned the truth. And we prepared. Dr. Webb took over. The Council believes it controls galactic civilization. In reality, the Council is a tool. A system designed by previous powers to ensure that no species ever grows strong enough to challenge the order they established. You are not rulers. You are prison guards, and you do not even know you are prisoners yourselves. High Arbiter Moroth's form began to destabilize. Energy crackled around his body as emotions overwhelmed his ancient mind. In 9,000 years, no one had ever spoken to him this way. No one had ever dared. You will be silent. He roared. You will submit to judgment. We will do nothing, David said calmly. Because, High Arbiter, while you have been listening to us speak, something has been happening. Something you should have noticed, but did not. Look at your sensor readings. Look at the stars outside your windows. Tell me what you see. Moroth turned. Other delegates turned. They looked at the massive windows that lined the chamber. windows that showed the galactic core and the billions of stars that surrounded the council headquarters. The stars were going out, one by one. Across the visible sky, stars were disappearing. Not exploding, not dimming, simply vanishing, as if someone was erasing them from existence. What is this? Ambassador Kell screamed. What are you doing? David Cole looked at the darkening sky with something like satisfaction. We are not doing anything. We are just watching. You see, we were not the only species that the sleepers warned. There were others, long ago, who received the same message. They tried to fight the council directly. They failed. So they chose a different path. They went somewhere else, somewhere beyond your reach. And they have been waiting for the right moment to return. He turned back to face the chamber. That moment is now. The council pushed the button on us too late. Humanity was never your target. We were the signal. And the signal has been received. The lights in the chamber began to flicker. Systems that had operated flawlessly for 12,000 years started to fail. And in the darkness between the dying stars, something vast and ancient began to move. The judgment of humanity was over. The judgment of the council had just begun. 3 days had passed since the stars began to vanish. The Galactic Council headquarters, once a symbol of absolute power, had become a fortress under siege by an enemy no one could see or understand. High Arbiter Morath had not left the command center since the darkness began. His silver form had grown dull, his energy core flickering with exhaustion. Around him, military commanders from 100 species argued about strategies that none of them believed would work. We have lost contact with 47 core systems, reported Admiral Vex of the Mordani fleet. His insectoid body clicked nervously as he reviewed the data. Entire worlds are simply not responding. Our fastest ships have been sent to investigate. None have returned. Ambassador Kell of the Vorthian Empire slammed her scaled fist on the table. This is the humans' fault. They brought this upon us. We should have executed them immediately, instead of letting them speak. The humans are contained in holding cells, Morath replied. They cannot help whoever is attacking us. Then force them to stop it. Torture them. Break them. Make them call off their allies. And if they are telling the truth? If they are merely the signal and not the source? Kell had no answer for that dot in holding cells deep beneath the council headquarters. Ambassador David Cole sat quietly with his eyes closed. Commander Vance paced the small room while Dr. Webb studied the walls with professional interest. They will come for us soon, Vance said. They will want answers we cannot give. We gave them all the answers they needed, David replied without opening his eyes. They simply chose not to believe us. Can you blame them? We told them that their entire civilization is a prison, that they have been manipulated for 12,000 years, that something ancient is coming to judge them. I barely believe it myself, and I have seen the evidence. David finally opened his eyes. The sleepers left us more than warnings, Elise. They left us a choice. We could hide like the others who came before us. We could flee to wherever they fled. Or we could stay and try to save what could be saved. And you chose to stay. Humanity has never been good at running away. A sound interrupted them. The cell door opened, and a being unlike any they had seen before stepped inside. It was tall and thin, wrapped in robes that seemed to be made of shadow itself. Where its face should have been, there was only smooth darkness. Ambassador Cole, it spoke in a voice that resonated in multiple dimensions. I am Watcher. We have been observing your species for some time. You have exceeded our expectations. Vance moved to stand between the creature and her colleagues. What are you? What do you want? I am one of the returned. We are the descendants of species who escaped the Council's control millions of years ago. We built a civilization beyond the edges of this galaxy, in spaces the Council cannot perceive. And we have come back to fulfill a promise. What promise? David asked. The promise of freedom, or the promise of destruction. The Council will choose which they receive. In the command center, Morath received word that something had entered the holding cells. Security feeds showed nothing but static. When the feeds cleared, the human representatives were gone. In their place was a message, carved into the cell wall in letters of light that refused to fade. We wish to negotiate. Send your highest authority to the Chamber of Origins. You have 12 hours. The Chamber of Origins was the oldest structure in Council space. It predated the Council itself by unknown millennia. No one knew who had built it or why. It sat at the exact gravitational center of the galaxy, a perfect sphere of black stone that absorbed all light and reflected nothing. For 12,000 years, the Council had used it for the most sacred ceremonies. Now it would host the most important meeting in galactic history. High Arbiter Morath traveled alone. He had wanted to bring guards, but something in the message made him understand that force would be meaningless here. Whatever waited in the chamber had power beyond anything the Council could match. The sphere's surface parted as he approached, creating an opening that led into absolute darkness. He floated through, his own energy providing the only illumination. Inside, he found a space that should not have existed. The sphere's interior was larger than its exterior, stretching into distances that hurt to perceive. Stars burned here, tiny points of light that Morath realized were not stars at all, but minds. Billions of minds gathered in one place. Watching him with curiosity and judgment, God at the center of this impossible space stood 4 figures. 3 were human. The 4th was the shadow-wrapped being called Watcher. Welcome, High Arbiter, David Cole said. Thank you for coming. Morath's form stabilized into something approaching dignity. You have attacked our civilization. You have destroyed our communications. You have spread fear throughout a galaxy we have kept peaceful for millennia. Why should I negotiate with terrorists? Because we are not the terrorists, Watcher replied. We are the ones trying to prevent terrorism on a scale you cannot imagine. The shadow being gestured, and images appeared in the space around them. Images of the galaxy as it had been millions of years ago. Thriving civilizations. Diverse species. Unlimited potential. This is what existed before the Council, Watcher continued. A galaxy of free peoples, developing at their own pace, making their own choices. Some made good choices. Some made bad ones. But they were free. The images changed. A wave of darkness swept across the galaxy, erasing civilizations, rewriting histories, imposing order where chaos had reigned. This is what the founders did. They believed that freedom led to conflict, and conflict led to destruction. So they created a system designed to prevent both. They created the Council. They created the integration protocols. They created a galaxy where no species could ever grow strong enough to challenge them. The founders saved the galaxy, Morath protested. They ended the wars. They brought peace. They brought stagnation. They brought control. They brought a slow death disguised as stability. Watcher moved closer. Tell me, High Arbiter, in 12,000 years of Council rule, how many species have developed true faster-than-light travel on their own? How many have created artificial intelligence that could evolve beyond their control? How many have asked the questions that lead to real advancement? Morath wanted to answer, but he realized he could not. The numbers were 0. They had always been 0. That was the point. The Council does not prevent war, Watcher concluded. It prevents growth. And growth is the only thing that could save this galaxy from what is coming. What is coming? The images changed again. Now they showed something beyond the galaxy's edge. A void that was not empty, Something lived there. Something that made the distances between stars look like inches. Something that had noticed the tiny lights of civilization and was slowly, inexorably moving toward them. The universe is not kind, Watcher said. It does not care about peace or stability or order. It contains things that exist only to consume. The founders knew this. They believed that keeping civilizations weak would keep them hidden. They were wrong. The light of even a suppressed civilization still burns. And something has seen it. David Cole stepped forward. The returned have been preparing for this for millions of years. We have developed technology that can fight what is coming. We have built ships, weapons, and defenses that the Council cannot imagine. But we cannot win alone. We need every species in this galaxy to reach its full potential. We need the chains removed. We need freedom restored. Morith's energy core pulsed with conflicting emotions. Everything he had believed for 9,000 years was being challenged. Everything the Council stood for was being called a lie. And if I refuse? If the Council refuses? Watcher's shadowy form seemed to grow. Then we will remove the chains ourselves. The stars that have vanished were not destroyed. They were moved, transported to safe locations beyond the reach of what is coming. We can save those who are willing to be saved. The rest will face the void alone. Morith looked at the humans. They were so small, so fragile. And yet they had done what no other species had managed in 12,000 years. They had challenged the order of things. They had asked questions. They had grown. How long do we have? He asked quietly. Before the void arrives? Perhaps 300 years? Perhaps less. Time moves strangely at the edges of existence. 300 years to prepare an entire galaxy for war. 300 years to set the galaxy free, David corrected. The preparation will follow naturally. It always does, when beings are allowed to reach their potential. Morith was silent for a long moment. Then his form began to shift, changing into something more compact, more focused, more like the being he had been before 9,000 years of stagnation had worn him down. The Council will not accept this easily, he said. Many will fight against change. We know. That is why we are not asking the Council. We are asking you, one mind at a time, one choice at a time. That is how freedom works. The High Arbiter of the Galactic Council looked at the human ambassador, the shadow being, and the billions of watching minds. He thought about 12,000 years of peace that was really imprisonment. He thought about the void approaching from the edges of existence, and he made his choice. What do you need me to do? 6 months after the meeting in the Chamber of Origins, the galaxy had begun to fracture. High Arbiter Morith had returned to the Council with a message that should have united them against a common threat. Instead, it had divided them more deeply than any war ever could. 12 factions now competed for control. The Loyalists believed the Council's way was still correct, and that the returned were simply another enemy to be defeated. The Reformers accepted that change was necessary, but disagreed about how fast it should happen. The Separatists wanted nothing to do with either side and had begun fortifying their home systems against all outsiders. And scattered among them were the awakened, beings from dozens of species who had started asking the dangerous questions that the Council had suppressed for millennia. Ambassador David Cole stood on the observation deck of the returned flagship, watching the chaos unfold on display screens that showed news feeds from 100 worlds. Commander Vance stood beside him, her expression grim. The Loyalists have taken control of the inner systems, she reported. They have branded Morith a traitor and elected a new High Arbiter, someone named Dreth. He has called for total war against both humans and the returned. Expected, David replied. Fear rarely responds to truth with acceptance. What about the Mordani? Still neutral. Admiral Vex has sealed their borders and is refusing all communications. The Vorthians have split. Half joined the Loyalists. Half are asking for asylum with the returned. And Earth? Vance paused before answering. Earth has gone dark. Our last communication was 3 days ago. They said they were implementing Protocol 7, and then nothing. Protocol 7. David closed his eyes. It was a plan they had hoped would never be necessary. Complete evacuation. Moving the entire human population to locations the Council could never find. Hiding humanity's potential until the galaxy was ready to receive it. But hiding had never been David's preference. He had stayed behind specifically to prevent it from coming to this. The new Arbiter will attack Earth first, he said. He needs a victory to consolidate power. Destroying humanity's homeworld would give him that victory. The Returned can protect Earth. Their ships are more advanced than anything the Council has. And if they do, they will prove the Loyalists' propaganda correct. They will prove that the Returned are invaders, conquerors, enemies. Every species that was considering changing sides will return to the Council out of fear. David turned away from the screens. No, we need a different approach. We need to show the galaxy what humanity really is. Not through force, through example. He walked toward the door. Get me a shuttle. I am going back to Council space. Vance grabbed his arm. That is suicide. The moment you enter Loyalist territory, they will execute you. Perhaps, or perhaps they will give me exactly what I need. A stage, an audience, a chance to speak truth to power one more time. 3 weeks later, David Cole surrendered himself to Loyalist forces at the border of Vorthian space. He was immediately transported to the Council headquarters and thrown into the same holding cell he had occupied months before. But this time, the cell was surrounded by guards, cameras, and force fields designed to contain beings far more dangerous than a single human. The new High Arbiter. Dreth came to see him personally. Dreth was a creature of crystalline structure. His body formed from interlocking geometric shapes that refracted light in disturbing patterns. He was younger than Morith, more aggressive, and completely convinced of his own righteousness. You made a mistake returning here, Dreth said. You could have hidden with your allies beyond the galaxy's edge. Instead, you chose to die. I chose to speak, David replied calmly. That is what humans do, even when no one wants to listen. What could you possibly say that would matter now? The truth about what is coming. The truth about what your precious council has been hiding from its own people for 12,000 years. The truth about why the founders really created this system of control. Dreth's crystalline form flickered with amusement. The void beyond the galaxy? We have heard your stories. Monsters in the darkness. Ancient threats approaching. It is propaganda designed to frighten weak minds into submission, then explain the stars that vanished. Advanced technology. Weapons we have not yet encountered. Nothing supernatural. Nothing cosmic. Just another enemy to be defeated. David smiled. Is that what you tell yourself? Is that what helps you sleep at night? Tell me, High Arbiter, have you accessed the Founders' Archive? The real archive, not the sanitized version they show to Council members? Dreth's form went still. The Founders' Archive is a myth. It is not. Morith knew about it. He had been searching for it for centuries. He never found it because he was looking in the wrong place. The archive is not in Council space. It is not in the Chamber of Origins. It is on Earth. The silence that followed was absolute. David watched the new Arbiter process this information, watched him try to decide if it was truth or manipulation. You are lying. The humans are a young species. Earth was not even discovered until 300 years ago. discovered by the Council 300 years ago. But the founders knew about Earth long before that. They seeded humanity there, specifically because they knew what we would become. They left their archive in our care because they knew that one day we would need it, and we would be willing to share it. David stood and walked to the edge of his cell. You can kill me. You can destroy Earth. You can pretend that the returned are your enemies, and the void is a fairy tale. But it will not change reality. Something is coming. The founders knew it. That is why they created the Council in the first place. Not to maintain peace, to buy time. And that time is running out. Dreth moved closer, his crystalline body humming with barely contained energy. Why should I believe anything you say? Because I am offering you something the returned would never offer. Proof. Send a ship to Earth, not a war fleet. One ship with observers from every major faction. Let them see the archive. Let them decide for themselves what is true. And if it is a trap, then you will have lost one ship. A small price for certainty. David met the Arbiter's fractured gaze without flinching. But if I am telling the truth, you will have gained something far more valuable. You will have gained a chance. A real chance to prepare this galaxy for what is coming. The founders failed because they chose control over cooperation. You do not have to make the same mistake. The decision took 3 days. Dreth consulted with his advisors, his generals, his priests. He reviewed every piece of intelligence the Council had ever gathered about humanity. And in the end, he made the choice that David had predicted. A single ship was sent to Earth. It carried representatives from the Loyalists, the Reformers, the Separatists, and 24 neutral species. They expected to find a trap, a weapon, a lie designed to weaken them. What they found was something else entirely. The founders' archive was not a building or a computer or a collection of documents. It was alive. A consciousness created by beings who had existed before the Council, before the galaxy's current civilizations, before recorded time. And it had been waiting for exactly this moment. It showed them everything. The true history of the galaxy. The cycles of growth and destruction that had repeated for billions of years. The void that had consumed civilizations beyond counting. And the desperate gamble the founders had made, creating the Council to slow development, hoping that stagnation would hide the galaxy from predators that existed between the stars. It had worked for 12,000 years. But nothing hid forever. The void had found them. It was coming. And the only hope for survival lay not in control, but in unity. Not in suppression, but in awakening every species to their full potential. The representatives returned to their factions with the truth. And slowly, painfully, impossibly, the galaxy began to change. On the observation deck of the returned flagship, Watcher stood beside Commander Vance, watching the first joint fleet exercises between former enemies. Your ambassador is remarkable, Watcher observed. He risked everything on the belief that truth would prevail over fear. That is what humans do, Vance replied. We bet on hope when logic says we should bet on survival. It is why the founders chose your species. Why they seeded you on a forgotten world and waited millions of years for you to grow. Humanity does not accept limits. You never have. Vance watched as ships from 100 species practiced formations. They would need to defend their galaxy against the coming darkness. They were not ready. They might never be ready. But they were trying. Together. Where is David now? She asked. He is on Earth. The archive has accepted him as its primary interface. He is learning everything the founders knew. Everything they feared. Everything they hoped. Watcher's shadowy form rippled. He will not be the same when he returns. No one who touches that much knowledge ever is. Will he still be human? He will be more human than anyone has ever been. That is the gift and the burden of understanding. Vance nodded slowly. The future was uncertain. The void was coming. The galaxy was still divided. But for the first time in 12,000 years, hope existed. Real hope. Born from the courage of one species that had refused to accept the chains offered as gifts. The Council had pushed the button too late. And because of that, humanity had bought the galaxy something it desperately needed. Time, 5 years, had passed since the truth emerged from Earth. 5 years of chaos, transformation, and desperate preparation. The galaxy that had existed under Council control was gone forever. In its place, something new was being born. Commander Elise Vance stood on the bridge of the Unity, the first ship ever built by a truly cooperative galactic effort. Its hull was Mordani steel, reinforced by Vorthian crystal lattice. Its engines used technology from the Returned, refined by human engineers. Its weapons were designed by species that had been enemies for millennia, working together for the first time in history. And it was not enough. The void breach has expanded by 40% in the last month, reported Science Officer Kell, a Vorthian whose scales had gone pale with stress. At current rate, we have approximately 18 months before the first major incursion reaches inhabited space. Vance studied the holographic display showing the galaxy's edge. A darkness was growing there. Not the absence of light, but something worse. A presence that consumed light, matter, and meaning itself. Ships sent to investigate had returned changed. Their crews spoke of things that should not exist, geometries that violated reason, whispers that came from inside their own minds. What about the defense grid? Vance asked. 60% complete. We need another year to finish it. A year we do not have. The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew the math. Everyone had done the calculations. The galaxy was preparing as fast as it could, but fast was not fast enough. The void would reach them before they were ready. There might be another option. The voice came from the doorway. Vance turned to see a figure she barely recognized. David Cole had entered the archive 5 years ago. What emerged was still human in shape, but carried something ancient in his eyes. He had touched knowledge that no mortal mind was meant to hold, and it had changed him in ways no one fully understood. David, you should not be off Earth. The archive needs you. The archive sent me. It has something to share. Something it has been waiting 12,000 years to reveal. He walked to the center of the bridge, and screens flickered as his presence interfaced with the ship's systems. The founders did not just create the Council to slow development. They created something else. A weapon. Or rather, the potential for a weapon. One that could only be activated when the galaxy was truly united. Kell's scales flushed with sudden interest. A weapon against the void? Where is it? Everywhere. The founders seeded it throughout the galaxy, hidden in places no one would think to look. In the cores of stars. In the genetic code of certain species. In ancient structures dismissed as natural formations. In the minds of beings who never knew they carried a piece of it. David's eyes seemed to look at something far away. Humanity was one of those pieces. The questions we could not stop asking, the growth we could not suppress, the refusal to accept limits. All of it was designed. We were created to be the catalyst that would unite the other pieces. And now that the galaxy is uniting, now the weapon can be assembled. But it requires something the founders never achieved. It requires every species to contribute willingly, not through control, not through manipulation, through choice. The weapon is not a thing. It is an idea, a frequency, a pattern that can only be generated when enough minds think it together. Vance shook her head slowly. You are talking about getting 700 species to think the same thought at the same time. Species that were killing each other 5 years ago. Species that still do not trust each other. I am talking about getting 700 species to want the same thing at the same time. There is a difference. You do not need trust for that. You need hope. You need a reason to believe that survival is possible. You need someone to show them the way. Who? David smiled, and for a moment he looked like the diplomat who had stood in the council chamber years ago, small and fragile and absolutely certain. Humanity. That has always been our role. Not to lead, not to command, to inspire, to be the example that shows others what is possible when you refuse to give up. The plan that emerged was unlike anything the galaxy had ever attempted. Not a military operation, not a diplomatic initiative. Something in between. Something human teams were sent to every inhabited world. Not soldiers or scientists, but storytellers, artists, teachers, beings who could communicate not just facts, but feelings. They told the story of humanity's journey. How a species that should have been exterminated had instead chosen to fight for a galaxy that had tried to destroy them. How they had found allies among the returned, understanding among the council, and hope in the face of extinction. The response was not immediate. Fear ran deep. Trust had been broken too many times. But slowly, like a flame spreading through dry grass, something began to change. On Mordani Prime, Admiral Vex authorized his fleet to join the defense grid. He did it not because he believed they could win, but because he believed that dying while fighting was better than dying while hiding. On Vorthia, the reptilian warriors who had once mocked humanity as prey began training alongside human marines. They found, to their surprise, that the small, soft creatures fought with a ferocity that matched their own. Among the crystalline beings, the fall of Arbiter Dreth created space for new leadership. Leaders who had seen the archive. Leaders who understood that the old ways meant certain death. And everywhere, beings who had never questioned the Council's control began to ask questions. Not dangerous questions. Hopeful questions. Questions about what they could become if they stopped accepting limits. 18 months passed. The void continued to grow. The defense grid was completed 3 days before the first major incursion reached the galaxy's edge. Commander, Vance stood on the bridge of the Unity as alarms screamed across every frequency. The void had sent scouts. Creatures that existed in angles wrong for this universe. Ships that moved without engines. Weapons that killed not bodies, but souls. All vessels form defensive positions, she commanded. Focus fire on any entity that breaches the grid. The battle was immediate and brutal. For every void creature destroyed, 10 more emerged from the darkness. The defense grid slowed them, but could not stop them. Ships were torn apart. Crews died screaming things that were not words. And then, across the galaxy, something changed. On 1,000 worlds, beings stopped what they were doing. Soldiers and scientists and children and elders. They felt something pull at their minds. Not painfully, gently, like a hand reaching out to guide them. David Cole stood at the center of the archive, surrounded by light that was not light, energy that was not energy. He had become the focus point for the weapon the founders had hidden. Through him, the thoughts of 700 species were being gathered and aligned, not forced, not controlled, invited. Think of what you want to save. His voice echoed across every mind that could hear it. Think of the future you want to exist. Think of the beings you love, the worlds you cherish, the hopes you hold. Let those thoughts become one thought. Let that thought become a weapon. On ships throughout the fleet, warriors of species that had been enemies for generations looked at each other. They saw not aliens, but allies. Not strangers, but family. The differences that had divided them seemed suddenly small compared to what united them. They thought of survival. They thought of freedom. They thought of a future where their children could grow without fear. And the galaxy, Responded. Energy cascaded through the defense grid, transformed by 700 minds thinking in harmony. It was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It was a declaration, a statement of existence so powerful that even the void could not ignore it. The creatures at the galaxy's edge recoiled, not destroyed, pushed back, shown that this galaxy was not prey, but predator, that the beings here would fight, would never stop fighting, would make the cost of consumption higher than any void entity was willing to pay. On the bridge of the Unity, Vance watched the readings change. The incursion was retreating. Not defeated, discouraged, the void would return. It always returned. But not today. Not tomorrow. Not until it had forgotten the sting of resistance and grown hungry enough to try again. "We did it," Kel whispered, her scales shifting to the brightest colors Vance had ever seen. "We actually did it." "We bought time," Vance replied. "That is all we can ever buy. Time to grow stronger. Time to prepare better defenses. Time to become whatever we need to become to survive." She looked at the stars, visible once again now that the void's shadow had retreated. That is what humanity has always done. Not win, not lose. Just refuse to give up. And sometimes that is enough. In the archive on Earth, David Cole collapsed. The effort had nearly killed him. But as medical teams rushed to stabilize his body, he smiled. The weapon had worked. The galaxy was united. And humanity had proven, once and for all, that the Council had pushed the button too late. They had tried to exterminate a species that could not be exterminated. A species that would fight to the last breath. A species that would inspire an entire galaxy to fight alongside them. The void would return. New threats would emerge. The future was uncertain. But for the first time in 12,000 years, that uncertainty carried not just fear, but hope. 100 years had passed since humanity first stood before the Galactic Council and refused to submit. 100 years since the stars began vanishing and the void revealed itself. 100 years since a young species from an unremarkable world changed the destiny of 7H. 100 civilizations. Ambassador Mara Cole stood where her great-grandfather David had once stood, in the center of the council chamber. But this chamber was different now. The tiered rows still rose toward a ceiling of captured starlight, but the beings who filled them were not the same. They sat not by species, but by purpose. Scientists alongside warriors. Artists beside engineers. Philosophers mixed with farmers. The old divisions had not disappeared, but they had become less important than the new connections. High Arbiter Thenix called the chamber to order. She was crystalline like her predecessor Dreth, but her light refracted in warmer colors. She had been chosen not because she was powerful, but because she understood something that previous leaders had not. True strength came from unity, not control. "We gather today to mark a century since the awakening," Thenix announced. A century since humanity showed us that our chains were of our own making. And a century since we began to become something greater than we had ever been. The screens around the chamber displayed images of the galaxy as it now existed. Defense grids that encircled every sector, built and maintained by species working together. Research stations where scientists from 100 worlds collaborated on problems that would have taken millennia to solve alone. Colony ships carrying mixed crews to new systems. Spreading civilization further than the old council had ever dared to dream. And at the galaxy's edge, the void still waited, patient, hungry, but held at bay by a galaxy that had learned to stand together. Myra stepped forward to address the assembly. She had her great-grandfather's calm eyes, though her hair was dark where his had been gray. She carried the weight of his legacy with the same quiet confidence he had shown when facing extinction. 100 years ago, the beings in this chamber voted to destroy humanity. They pushed a button that should have ended our species. And they pushed it too late. A murmur passed through the assembly. Some remembered that day, though they were few now. Most had been born into a galaxy already transformed. They pushed it too late because humanity had already done something that could not be undone. We had asked questions. Questions about why the council existed. Questions about what lay beyond the rules. Questions about what we could become if we refused to accept limits. She paused, letting her words settle. Those questions could not be killed. They spread to every world, every species, every mind that heard them. And they changed everything. The screens shifted, showing faces now. Not just human faces, but faces from across the galaxy. Beings who had grown up in the new era, who had never known the old council's oppression, who had been raised to ask questions and seek answers. My great-grandfather David Cole merged with the Founder's archive to save this galaxy. The effort cost him his health, his humanity, and eventually his life. He died 15 years ago, surrounded by friends from species that once wanted him dead. His last words were a question. He asked if we had learned enough to survive without him. Mira smiled, and there was something of David in that expression. Something that refused to accept defeat. I believe the answer is yes. Not because we are strong enough to defeat the void. We may never be strong enough for that. But because we have learned something more important. We have learned that strength is not measured by what you can destroy. It is measured by what you can build, what you can protect, what you can inspire others to become. She turned slowly, addressing every section of the chamber. The void will return. The archive warns us that it always returns. It is not evil in any way we understand. It simply is what it is. A force of entropy. An ending that comes for all things. The old council believed that hiding from it was the only option. They were wrong. Hiding only delayed the inevitable while preventing us from growing strong enough to face it. Humanity chose a different path. We chose to grow, to question, to reach beyond our limits. And when the galaxy tried to stop us, we chose to share that gift rather than keep it for ourselves. The screen showed images of the first incursion, 100 years ago. The creatures of the void tearing through defenses. Ships dying by the thousands. And then the moment when 700 species thought as one and pushed the darkness back. That moment was not the end of our story. It was the beginning. Since then, we have pushed the void back 17 times. Each time, we grow stronger. Each time, we learn more. Each time, we prove that the founders were wrong about one fundamental thing. Myra raised her voice, letting it carry to every corner of the chamber. They believed that control was necessary for survival, that freedom led to chaos, and chaos led to destruction. But freedom is not the opposite of order. It is the source of it. When beings are free to ask questions, they find answers. When they are free to grow, they become stronger. When they are free to choose, they choose to stand together. That is what humanity brought to this galaxy. Not weapons, not technology, not even courage, though we have those things too. We brought the belief that limits exist only to be broken, that tomorrow can be better than today. That hope is not foolishness, but the foundation of all progress. She looked toward the section where the returned sat. They had emerged from their exile beyond the galaxy's edge and now worked alongside the species they had once abandoned. Their technology had advanced the defense grids by centuries. Their knowledge had unlocked secrets the old council had suppressed. And they had learned something from their younger cousins. The returned hid for millions of years. They believed that escape was survival. Humanity taught them that survival means nothing without purpose. Now they build alongside us. They fight alongside us. They hope alongside us. The chamber was silent. Even the youngest delegates felt the weight of the moment. Tomorrow, we launch the expedition. 50,000 ships. Crews from every species. The largest collaborative mission in galactic history. We are going to the void's edge, not to fight, but to understand. To learn what the void truly is. To discover if there is a way to coexist with the darkness, rather than simply hold it back. It is dangerous. Many who go will not return. But they go willingly, because they believe that knowledge is worth any risk. That is the legacy of the species that refuse to be exterminated. Not survival at any cost, but growth at every opportunity. Myra stepped back from the center of the chamber. 100 years ago, this council pushed a button too late. They tried to destroy a species that had already begun to change the galaxy. Today, I ask this council to push a different button. To approve the expedition. To take the next step toward a future none of us can fully imagine. She looked around the chamber one final time. My great-grandfather asked questions that the council could not answer. I ask you now to be the council that seeks those answers. Not out of fear, not out of desperation, but out of the same thing that has driven humanity. Since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what was out. There, curiosity, hope, the refusal to accept that this is all we can. B. High Arbiter Thenix rose from her position. Her crystalline form blazed with light that reflected the emotions of every being in the chamber. The motion to approve the expedition is before this assembly. All in favor? The response was not a vote. It was a roar. 700 species speaking with one voice. Affirming a future that their ancestors could never have imagined. As the chamber erupted in celebration, Mayra Cole stood quietly at the center. She thought of her great-grandfather, who had surrendered to an enemy that wanted to kill him because he believed that truth would prevail. She thought of Commander Vance, who had led the first United Fleet against the Void. She thought of all the humans and non-humans who had died building this moment. They had pushed the button too late. By the time the old council tried to destroy humanity, humans had already planted seeds that could never be uprooted. Questions that could never be unasked. Hope that could never be extinguished. And now those seeds had grown into a galaxy, transformed. The expedition launched the next morning. 50,000 ships flying toward the unknown. Humans and Vorthians and Mordani, and crystalline beings and shadow-wrapped returned, and hundreds of other species, all working together. They did not know what they would find. They did not know if they would survive. But they went anyway, because that was what beings did when they refused to accept limits. The council had pushed the button too late. And because of that, the galaxy had a future built by the species that would not be destroyed, the species that asked questions, the species that inspired 700 civilizations to reach for something greater than survival. Humanity had changed the galaxy, and the galaxy, in turn, had become something worth fighting for. The void waited at the edge of everything, patient, eternal, hungry, but so did hope. And hope, as humanity had proven again and again, was the most dangerous force in the universe. The story was not over. It would never be over. But that was exactly the point. The end was not something to fear. It was something to outgrow, and humanity had only just begun.